Hi everyone, thanks again for joining me on Sealed for Good. As you can see, this is a special episode because I'm doing this one by Zoom. I've got a special guest with me who I was going to do this video live in Perth a few months ago, but then COVID put a hold to that, but we didn't want to hold up the show. And I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. I've got Iain Middleton from Perth, Western Australia with me. Iain, thanks for joining.
Hi, how are you? I've got my coffee.
And me too, mate. I don't know what time it is.
Absolutely fantastic. It's reasonably early here, although I'm a bit of an early person. It's about 8:30.
So Iain, those of our watchers that don't know who you are, this is a really great episode. And hopefully they've understood the intro, because we've got a lot of tilers that follow our content, and obviously waterproofing and tiling goes hand in hand for many applications. But you are a lecturer at TAFE, at one of the TAFEs in Perth, but also you are a pool tiling expert, and more importantly, a mosaic expert and a resource of information that many in the industry go to. That's how I came across your content. And when we caught up last year in Perth, we had a great chat about that. So I think today everyone's going to be installed for a really great episode of Sealed for Good. In fact, we're going to have 2 episodes of Sealed for Good. So let's talk about in the pool application, because this is one that comes up frequently in our industry. A lot of people think pools don't need to be waterproofed. Over the years, my experience has been people think that if they've got a suspended pool, they might need to waterproof it, but if it's a ground pool, it's concrete and it's 32 MPa, they don't need to do it. So I'm not getting you to sell any products, but I want you to talk about the application and how do we successfully construct a waterproof pool, and then how we integrate tiling with that. So just give us a bit more of your background on that and what your thoughts are, Iain.
Okay. I believe wholeheartedly that all concrete swimming pools should be waterproofed. Now that's
why is that? Why is that?
It's not one membrane fits all. You don't just paint a membrane on and it's either waterproofed or it's not. There's a whole lot more to it than that. A lot of waterproof membranes you can't put underwater, for instance. Some you can, but it introduces 2 problems. The first one is what it's stuck to, what your membrane or your waterproofing is adhering to, and what adheres to that. So you introduce 2 new weak links, shall we say. And with a swimming pool, I would never ever use a membrane to waterproof a swimming pool, which sounds a little bit controversial, but to me, a waterproofing in a swimming pool is a little bit like a seatbelt. You hope you'll never use it. You hope you'll never need it. And what a membrane does in a swimming pool, it just becomes part of the structure. That right deep down in the swimming pool, if you've got a pinhole in that membrane, you've compromised the whole shell. Within about 3 weeks, the whole shell will be saturated. I want to dispel a myth, first of all, that concrete is waterproof. You might get a concrete from water from one side to the other side of the pool. It might not come through, so therefore the pool's watertight. However, concrete itself isn't waterproof. It will soak up moisture. So the idea would be to stop the moisture actually getting to the pool. I've got some photographs I'll show you shortly that where water's got to the rebar in the shell that may or may not be at the right depth, north-facing vanishing edges that were hot, heated up in the sun. The pool pump would come on and cold water would flow down these hot tiles and they'd be all popping off. The second thing with swimming pool tiling, ceramic tiles are a different breed. Glass is purely a very, very different animal. Glass has no absorption at all, whereas ceramic tiles do. So you've really got to be very careful. And back to the Vivo, I learned how to put white background behind tiles. I've got a couple of pictures there of some black mosaics that needed a white background. And when you put a white background behind them, you see the purples and the golds and the blues come through. It just brings it alive, as opposed to a grey or a brown background. And of course, you get a lot of shadowing behind translucent tiles if you put the glue on, and you can get this shadowing effect if you've got grey glue and or grey background and white glue. So that's where I come into the picture. And I've also helped many people learn how to put glass in a swimming pool. It's the most aggressive environment you're ever going to put a tile into. It's not drinking water. It's
even from a waterproofing perspective too, Ian, is
right.
we talk about this all the time, that one of the most testing environments you're going to put a membrane in is a pool.
Yeah.
Because once it is tiled or rendered over, or even with chlorinated rubbers that they still might put in, that pool structure is exposed to water 24/7, 365. And it's not just water like we have water tanks, but as you said, it's chemicals. And you have a varying level of chemicals. You know, I've seen some pool cleaners that they know that the owners in the wintertime might not be in the pool, so they dose a little bit heavier. So it saves them another trip out there. And that sort of dosage we've seen even in our lab testing can do some severe damage to a membrane. And I'm even talking about things like epoxy coatings that we've seen impacted by these chemicals. And I think it's really important, and that's why I really wanted to have you on this program, this episode, is because you're a passionate tiler. You spoke about how you get that nice look of the different colours with the mosaic, and that's what the owner wants. A pool is a very expensive investment.
Yeah.
But it should have to be an investment you do once, and it's there for decades. And the problem is tilers go ahead and they do it all, and without knowing what could compromise their work. And like anything that's expensive to build, it's very expensive to repair. We know the remedial side is very high. And when you start having pools where water's got to be emptied and Murphy's Law comes in, it happens at summertime when people want to get in the pool, and you only need that one tile to crack. And this is not like a shower alcove or a balcony. You've got water, as you said, from a pinhole where the whole shell becomes saturated. And I've been in those situations where people want you to go out there, give them some sort of consultative advice, and it is trying to find sometimes a needle in the haystack of where it all started. But then the simplest things could make this work really easy. And I always say to our clients, treat a pool, your membrane, like a liner. This is not slapdashing a membrane on there, painting it on or brushing on or troweling on. You need to treat the pool like an absolute liner, you know, that can then be tiled over. And so the water cannot penetrate that system. Yeah. So the concrete always stays dry.
Unfortunately, sometimes you need to change a tile, and with a membrane, you're pulling the membrane off if you change the tile.
If it's a direct adhesion to the membrane, though.
Yeah. One of the problems I've seen in the industry, I mean, just a tiny little bit of background, I see a failed, fully tiled glass swimming pool every week. I see one either in this country or other countries. I see so many of them, and there's a common denominator that pops up.
Which is
lots of the common denominators, but one of the particular things is the render itself. And you're painting your membrane usually after the render's been put on. Mm-hmm. And often they'll use a sand and cement render, which is disaster waiting to happen, because the chemical, if the water gets to that, it will eat it away. It will just eat that cement away. So one of the things I started to do was waterproof the render first. So if there ever is a problem with a pinhole or water gets to that render, it doesn't travel. It doesn't keep going through the whole pool system. Again, when I was in America, they would also spray the shell, often with a sodium silicate, or I think they call it colloidal silicate is another name for it. They would spray the pool first when it was fresh, when it was alkaline, and seal the pool off. Then they would put a waterproof render on top of that, and then they would put a membrane on top of that. And there's a lot of companies, I don't want to drop names, but there's particular products that they love to use, which is why I'd suggest you don't just mix and match. You do a system, and there's reasons for that. All the companies that do waterproofing for swimming pools have a system. You know, you really don't want to buy one product from that company and another one from that company. Some like a moisture barrier, some like a primer, some don't. So there's a reason for that to start with. But the render itself, I feel, is beneficial if it's waterproof. And there's a number of additives you can put into that. But there starts to be an issue then, because now you've waterproofed the render, it doesn't stick well to the shell. So you've got a 32, 40 MPa concrete shell, and you're going to try and put 18 MPa render onto it. Those two materials aren't naturally compatible. So a bonding bridge is a good idea, where you actually cement or glue that render onto the shell wall. So you become this layering to do with swimming pools. It's not I'll buy a membrane, a bucket of membrane, and paint it on, and therefore I'm waterproof. That can cause more problems than it's actually worth. So
this is what you said there, Ian, is it's very old school. And when I say that, I don't say it to actually be derogative. It's important that we understand that there are some methods of dealing with cement and concrete that the way they were done originally, and the Europeans have done this for many, many years, is still successful. You know, and you know, I look at some of these structures, like when I was a kid on building sites and with tiling with my dad and the construction of concrete, they used to do the wet lay. And some of these tile jobs I've still seen that tiles haven't moved yet. We've got jobs now that tiles are lifting, and it's the way we build, etc. But what you mentioned there is something we've all, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, is because we've always encouraged a sealing slurry. Now that process in the US that you said of the silicate, that's not a practice we use here in Australia. There's very few pool builders I've come across that do that.
I've seen a lot of failures using that technique, to be honest with you.
What we've done is real simple sealing slurry. You know, and we put our 11Y additive in that, which is waterproof, and it does two things for us. It fills those pores up of the concrete. So, you know, you've at least got all the pores filled, and you've got a waterproof slurry that bonds to that. But the key is with what you mentioned about the 18 MPa going over 32 MPa, is that when you put a sealing slurry with a render that's also got the additive in there, then you've got that wet on wet method. Now, wet on wet method has been used for probably 100 odd years by the Europeans, with even before additives were in the mix, and we know that a wet on wet versus wet on dry, even with great polymers and additives in there, still bonds better. Adhesion is far better. It's the way cement hydrates, and tilers, these are the stuff that these Cert 3 certificates and sometimes trade schools don't teach, these little, what I call tricks of the trade.
Yeah, little nuances. I mean, hundreds of years ago, they would waterproof a pool by using the adhesive. They would almost render with the adhesive, and that would go all over the pool, first of all, and then stick tiles onto that. I mean, one of the things I hear all the time, as you probably do, is I've done this for 30 years, I've never had a failure. Yeah. The cement's changed. Even in the last 10 years, we've had anti-caking agents, we've had anti-dust properties. We've got no asbestos in the materials anymore. We had at one point 60–70% asbestos in the cement. We've got new glues now that you've got to make sure the water content is exactly right. Otherwise, you've compromised. Your matrix, the particles are too far apart, etc., etc. Your bonds weakened. The products we're getting today aren't like they were 30 years ago, or 50 years ago. So it's really important that people connect with the manufacturer.
I think, you know, we had a video a few weeks ago on Seal for Good showing additives in screed mixers. And when you absorb them in water 24 hours and weigh them, the water uptake. And I've always been talking about that. And when I've seen certain products like our Gripset 11Y with a mortar and non-mortar, it's amazing how you can actually see the water be repelled when the additive's in there. But these are very cheap things, and it's not just us, Ardex, Mapei, they've got some great additives in their products that you can use. There's a lot of the manufacturers got them, Accredited got one. But the important thing is you need to ensure that these are things you must mix into your mortar. It's going into an immersed area, you know, and the cost of these additives is minute.
Yeah.
You know, it's just knowing how to use it. They're very flexible the way they can be used in terms of the additive ratios, but it just should need a process that you go with all the time, and that wet on wet application. And most manufacturers that, you know what they're doing would be training their customers or showing them how to use that. It can't just be on a data sheet, because, you know, that information you gave then is a real gem. Cement is not the same as it was 10 years ago. We're seeing cement in this country now coming out of all sorts of countries. It's not always Australian made, which we'll talk about in a different episode. And so the quality is not there and the consistency is not there. So one method doesn't fit all.
No, certainly not. We had a Tyler come over from the UK a little while ago, and he put some steps on outside a house. And he said, I've been doing this for 20 years. And he used a slurry, a cement and water and sand slurry to do it. Within 2 weeks, it was every single step had failed. We need elastication in our cement here. We've got temperatures that go to 40 degrees, and then nighttime we're back down to 20 or less. So there's 25-degree difference from night to day. We need to take that into consideration when we're tiling a pool. And the cost of fixing a pool, once it's a year later and it's now a Zen garden in a $10 million home, and you've got to come in there with jackhammers to take it off the wall, it's really not a good idea. So you try and do the right thing. So where I come into it, I want to see what the best method is, and then if we can come up to that, that's fine. I don't like to see a fully tiled Bezzazza swimming pool done on the cheap, because it probably will fail, and that doesn't do the manufacturer any good, the Bezzazza any good, the adhesives any good. But we've also had problems with manufacturers. If we're going to talk about tiling a swimming pool with glass, then the glass needs to be examined as well. We've got different methods of making glass tile. They don't make much in Italy anymore because of the way that glass is made. Some of the chemicals in it give off gases, and there's borax involved, and there's procedures that need to be adhered to. One of them is annealing, and that's lowering the temperature of the glass tile very, very slowly. It's a little bit like how you make Pyrex glass, and that isn't being done, in my opinion, as it was maybe 20 years ago. So your tiles that came from Italy with a mesh back with 4 tiny little dots of glue holding that mesh on. Now we're getting glass tile from who knows where. I mean, India, China, Philippines. I'm not suggesting that they're doing the wrong thing, but possibly some of the quality control could be better. So when you talk about tiling a swimming pool, there's a lot of things involved. If it's a bathroom, then you just paint your membrane on and stick your tile on. With a swimming pool, you can't go back and fix. Well, you can, but you can't really go back and fix it. And if you can do it right in the first place, which is why I went on this global search for, you know, the ultimate way to do a swimming pool, and look at the
science behind it. Yeah, there's a science behind it, and that's where I think we want that message to be clear. Absolutely. Around our waterproofers, our tilers, our builders, our engineers, and our architects understand this is not trades where you just slap stuff together. There's a science to it, and there's evidence on how to do this. There's some really good examples you've shared. I just want to, before we go into the next episode about tiling, I just want to go into to get this right, because we get a lot of questions on this piece, Ian, and I want your final opinion. If we had, for example, we don't have pool manufacturers putting the silicates on the pool, but you use a sealing slurry to shut the pool off, or some manufacturers will put an epoxy primer down. You then put a membrane system over that. Then I've always been of the opinion that we shouldn't tile directly to the membrane in the pool.
No.
Because you've got shearing, you've got thermal expansion, and people forget, doesn't matter how good a membrane that is and the Sure hardness, that's a stress you put on the membrane. So our specification has always mentioned putting either another slurry coat over the membrane or preferably a 5 to 10 mil render, waterproof render that goes over the membrane, wet on wet, and we use a cementitious system. And then you can put a waterproof tile adhesive over that. And for us, we've had a long history with it because it just is peace of mind that the tile stresses are not directly on the membrane face.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not going to contradict that.
But there might be other methods that's a good method. I'd love to hear what you've experienced with yours.
Yeah, there are other methods. I mean, that is very similar to the method I would use in a swimming pool. I would usually get the glue that I'm going to stick the tiles on with, and I would skim coat that whole pool, and then I would sand it back till it's flat. Because one of the reasons I would use a face-mounted mosaic tile, I need that surface absolutely flat as a pancake. Now, if you don't use face-mounted tiles and you use rear-mounted tiles, it's a different kettle of fish, because you can put one coat on and grout and glue all at once. You can see the tiles, you can clean the joints out with a little dish brush if you need to, and that surface doesn't need necessarily to be as flat. So the other thing is, glue sticks to glue far better than it sticks to a membrane. Yeah. So you're actually seeding the surface. You're also slowing.
Sorry, that skim coat of adhesive you're putting over the membrane?
Yes.
And then you sand the adhesive down?
Yes.
Okay, and then you would notch your adhesive, your fresh batch of adhesive over the sanded version?
Yep. And you'd washed all the dust off, obviously. But then you're not directly sticking to the membrane. One of the problems that had for a longer while, certainly in America, they'd roll the membrane on, and quite often it wasn't smoothed out first of all. So quite often they will either glue render the whole pool first before they put the membrane on. That saves materials, but it also stops little holes and little divots that don't quite get covered. And then a skim coat on top of that, so you've actually sealed in the membrane. It's disappeared. But then you've got different adhesions with different layers that need to be accounted for. You can't really just stick straight onto the concrete shell. However, you can if it's a ceramic tile. In Europe, they don't spray gunite as we do. They pour swimming pools with a vibration, so the concrete's denser. We still gunite or shotcrete a pool, and usually what rebounds off the wall ends up as the floor. So you've got different densities all over the pool. And in an ideal world, that would be fantastic if it was done to textbook and everything was tickety-boo. It often doesn't happen like that. So you want to separate your work from someone else's, obviously. But yeah, the slurry coat, absolutely, over the top of the membrane. But all these processes take time and cost money. And I think that's the problem. We end up with a pool. Someone will say, I'll do it for $150 a square meter. Okay, we'll have him. Or I'll do it for $400 a square meter. And the client looks at you and thinks you're ripping me off. And in actual fact, you're getting less than the 5 guys that are going to do it in a week. I might take 2-3 months to do a swimming pool, and then it needs long chain polymers. When you're putting additives in, need time to cure. I mean, just a quickie. I grew up. I'm not a chemist, obviously. I grew up with my father was an industrial chemist, a paint chemist for automotive industry. So we grew up with polymers and esters and copolymers around the dinner table when I was, 4 or 5. So I sort of understood a little bit about that. Then when I spoke to various chemists and the laticrete chemist I spoke to for a while, and then I spoke to the MAP people, and I spoke to the Citrus people, etc., etc. So I've made it my interest, my business to to find out what they've got going in there. Which is where I come back to, it's not just a slurry coat. Oh, we've got this, so we'll just put a slurry coat on, like Phil said or Ian said. It's far more important that you get the particle size that matches the material that you're using. So you get this system approach. And with a pool, you've already got concrete, you've got render, you've got waterproofing, you've got skim coat. It's not a bathroom. And done properly takes time. I think some of the tile manufacturers want to speed that up and make it easier and quicker for people. So hence the mesh tiles. But to do it properly, it takes time and costs money. The actual finished look of the pool, day one, is the same. It looks exactly the same. After a while, you can see various problems with that. Most Aussie people buy that and sell houses every 5 years, so they're not really interested in a 10-year longevity of their pool. And of course, a lot of them buy products because they've got a warranty. We've got a 25-year warranty on our system. Well, unfortunately, that's completely the wrong way to buy a product, because products don't fail. Application of them does. So quite often you'll have a bag of glue that's not stuck those tiles down, and the bigger manufacturers will say to you, well, I've got 50,000 bags of that, and your one bag has failed. That has to be you, not the product. And you don't want to go back and fix it. In America, they sue each other. Everyone sues each other. And we had a house, I was very lucky to be privy to the Water-Shaped University. They've just done a course on glass mosaics, as it happens. But Randy Beard from Pure Water Pools took me to a pool and showed me this pool where it was water coming through the roof of the underground pool room, and just this whole thing. Now, to fix that pool, unfortunately, the wall of the shell was holding the house up. Quite a lot of these pools are integral to the house design, and to fix that pool, that concrete had to come out, and there's rusted rebar, and I think it was about $1.5 million to fix a $4,000 waterproofing issue.
Can I ask you, Ian, what's happening right now? I'm sensing that there's going to be guys watching this that follow the content and they followed your content, and they're going to be going, seriously though, am I hearing out there that I can only waterproof a pool and it's going to take me a month to do that job, versus because I'm never going to win that job against these guys that want to quote cheaper? Or if I'm using a system from Laddercrete, or I'm using a system from Mapei or Ardex or Gripset, or someone who's been doing this for a long time, they can give me the system, they can back it up, they can give me even a method to do this. Can I get a decent sized pool done within a week or two, waterproofed, and then ready for tiling? If the manufacturer tells me they can,
I dispute that, because some of the materials need to cure. So after the last tile goes on, it's 21 to 28 days before you can fill that up with water. So that's one of the problems I see, is they finish the pool, they do all the right things, and the week later they fill it up with water.
So the filling of the pool can be something that can be part of the specification. It's like, even exposing a shower with the bathroom renovation market, how quick you can start using it again. But is it the application of the waterproofing and tiles that needs to take a month, or the whole, you're talking about even filling the water up into the pool?
Yeah, it's after you've finished, to fill it up. If you're using either Mapei, Laddercrete, I don't know about Gripset yet. I've got your brochures, and absolutely fabulous. Normally a long chain polymer, that's a wet polymer that you put in an additive, will take 21 to 28 days to cure properly.
Yep, that's correct. And our systems are the same.
The epoxies that people are using these days, they often use epoxy instead of a waterproofer. And that isn't, it helps, but it isn't waterproofing a pool. And epoxy, I think after 5 or 6 days, you can fill it up with water, no problem at all. However, if you've got a system that you've put on 4 or 5 layers of stuff, the whole thing needs to cure. You can also leave the pool empty too long. There's a couple of situations, I don't want to mention any names, but where the pool was emptied and just left empty, and its cracks started to appear everywhere. There's issues with emptying swimming pools as well as filling them up. So if you empty a non-waterproof pool quickly, you'll get this seepage wanting to come out of the walls of the pool.
Correct. Yeah.
And there's lots of issues with that. This is where I'd like to say that pool tiling should be a separate licensed trade. You're dealing with products that you wouldn't use necessarily in a bathroom, and the whole process is not something you just pick up. You need some input from manufacturers and training how to get a quick job. I can put paper face tiles on quicker than anyone else without squish through, and that's taken me a long while to learn that. And basically, the tile is the last element that really needs to worry about. It's the surface that you're putting it on. That's crucial to everything. And if it's bulletproof and you can hit it with a hammer and nothing happens, then you put tiles on it, no problem at all. What I see a lot of is where they'll paint waterproofing a cementitious one on the outside of a vanishing edge, and then a few years later you'll get this seep through from the main pool. You really should tank a pool, and even when they're plastering products like beadcrete or pebble, these glass pebble pools, they waterproof it first. But you've got a problem with where the waterline tile is, where it meets the plaster, and water seeps in there. So
because you get capillary action and water moves up, and we educate them all the time. I just want to touch on something before we finish up this first part of the episode, Ian, that because a lot of people inquire this. Sheeny gets a lot from tech inquiries, and I get it all the time with our guys. Underground pools, you mentioned about epoxy. We actually sell a lot of our Gripset E60, which is our epoxy primer, and all the manufacturers have got a good one out there. However, in pools, I never recommend it, because you mentioned there before, there is no negative. I've never had a situation with concerns of negative pressure on a swimming pool. Because the fact is, once the water's in the pool, there is no negative pressure. It equates itself out. It equalizes out between the positive and the negative. So that fallacy is just ludicrous. Yet a lot of waterproofers think, oh, I'm going to treat this like a basement wall. I'll put an epoxy primer on. And you mentioned then you trap the moisture in the concrete. And the great thing about simple technology like cementitious systems for pools is they're breathable.
Yes.
We forget about that. So even all those systems that we spoke about, you mentioned cementitious, you can have a very good polymer render, a polymer slurry, a cementitious membrane, which we've been using for years. They will still breathe and allow those vapors to come through. The tile adhesive breathes, the tile grout joints breathe, and so that 28 days curing afterwards, when you finish your job and before the pool is filled, it's still allowing residual moisture in the system to evaporate.
Yes. And
that's really important. And when you do that epoxy coating first, or you use epoxies, what you are doing is the evaporation can only come about from what's above the epoxy, not below it.
Yeah.
And that can really cause other issues. So, guys, it's something that, a lot of people go, oh, Grips is just trying to push its barrow. I'm telling you, go and check out the methods of pool building around the world, the best methods. Cementitious systems are used. I just want to wrap this part of the episode up on the waterproofing side. So if you were putting your consulting hat on now, and someone said, Ian, we've got just a budget pool that's going to be built for a family home. They need it tiled. It's a concrete shell. What specification or what should I go with? What would your recommendation be to start with?
I'd ask them firstly, what tile are you using? Is it glass or is it not glass?
Yep.
If it's glass, a slightly different process. I want to make sure if it's a ceramic tile, then we end up with moisture going into the tile and helping that bond. But I would suggest you put an additive in your render the pool by adhering that render, bonding bridge between the render and the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I would then, if it was a ceramic pool, I would just stick tiles straight to the render, bang. If you're going to waterproof the pool, then obviously you want a membrane on there, and I'd use a cementitious one. They seem to be a little bit robust. However, I really liked, I don't want to drop any names, but I really like the Hydroband from Accredited. That works really well, but it's not really recommended that you paint parts of the pool with it. It wants to be the whole thing or nothing. But that's where the additive in the render helps, because if you do get a pinhole in that, then it's not going to travel, it's not going to go anywhere. And then just stick your tiles on with a cementitious grout as well. And some of them are less sandy. They've got all kinds of different properties. We've got plastic shavings in various. It's dust, and there's all kinds of different products you can use, but a cementitious product. So there's your grout. You can also change cementitious grout as if it wears out over the years at the waterline or somewhere. You can redo it with epoxy. You're stuck. It's there. However, epoxy, just a quickie, is usually not UV stable. So
no, that's right.
It's not a brilliant thing to put outside anyway.
Yeah, if you've got an indoor pool, it might be different, but on the outside, that's correct.
Yeah.
So the cementitious membrane, though, what you were mentioning, the reason for that is the other benefit of it is it gives the ability to bond to a damp surface if the render is not fully cured, which is okay. It doesn't delay the job. There's little or no blistering with cementitious systems as well, which is a benefit. And the fact that you are going to put another render or ceramic tile adhesive system over the top of it, you have that compatibility together.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want cold joints in a pool. I see a lot of people they waterproof one part, tile it, then they'll waterproof another part, tile it. And you've got these cold joints where you've joined materials together. I'm in my own little sort of OCD-ness. I need to do one thing and then another and then another, and then finally swept out and put my plimsolls on, and then I'll put tiles on. I don't do bits and pieces. That's just, I suppose, my way. But I don't like the idea of cold joints of waterproofing in a swimming pool. That doesn't work for me very well. You might tell me that that's fine.
No, look, there are ways of avoiding that. Sometimes, depending on the size of a pool, the application just can't be done in one go, but there are ways of reactivating your membrane to ensure you can avoid that. And that's why we use our 11Y slurry, because if you had to stop at one point, the next day you could get over that, overlap the existing membrane and make it all seamless. Iain, one last thing. Oh, there you go. You're a fan.
Oh, absolutely. And I've picked out a system I could use to tile a pool. What I'd love to see in here is a pool section with a just swimming pools. Bang, another page.
What we're going to do, Iain, you might not have seen our new Sealed for Good magazine, our waterproof magazine.
Yep.
And our editor on that actually has you lined up. I haven't even asked you yet officially, but we're going to get an article from you later in the year on one of our episodes on how to waterproof a successful pool.
Sure.
And go through that, because look, tilers are fickle, a trade, and this is a Gripset program, but like I've always mentioned, we mentioned the other manufacturers have got great systems, and you spoke about Accredited, Mapei, Ardex. These are brands that are global, lots of experience, and experiences come from other countries that were brought here, and we need to all be sharing the knowledge out there and getting this right. So there's lots we can learn from that perspective. Iain, I'm going to end this part of our episode. Guys, thanks for joining us in this episode. Join in next week, because part 2 is going to come about shortly. And Iain is going to talk about tiling in the pool, particularly mosaic tiling. You don't want to miss that episode. Iain, I'll join you again soon.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.